Hello. First of all, I would also like to thank Anthi Wiedenmayer for being so punctual and honoring her commitment for this event by sending us her announcement. Hopefully, I can do her justice. Her announcement has to do with the education and training in Greece. Some of these things you are very familiar with, being Greek audience mostly here. Dear colleagues, I'm very sorry that I cannot be with you today and very grateful to Dimitra Stafilia, that's myself, who is willing to present you my announcement. In my speech, I would like to focus on interpreting in crisis settings and allow me to call it community interpreting, although I know that there are several names used worldwide by academics and professionals alike, and to consider community interpreting as a sub-discipline of interpreting. Therefore, I would like to begin with a short presentation of the field of interpreting in Greece. Hey, I have this, okay. Conference interpreting studies in Greece are provided by two universities, one of them being the Ionian University at an undergraduate level, and the other one, the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki, with its joint master course for conference interpreting. They both offer languages such as English, German, and French, Italian, and Spanish, as you all may know, while in the academic year 2019-2020, it will be the first time that the master course will be offering Russian as well. However, in the last few years, several private schools have started offering classes in conference interpreting, mainly for the combination English, Greek, English, and mainly with no recognition from the Greek state. Therefore, they are not accredited programs. But as you know, the profession of conference interpreting is not recognized either. The Greek society is probably still not even able to distinguish interpreting from translating. And the need for interpreting studies or even training still remains unknown for the majority of the users or clients in the free market. The situation is gradually changing due to the efforts of the academia and professionals. Meanwhile, a majority of conference interpreters in Greece have been trained for this job, and it is certainly no coincidence that 5 years ago, a professional organization was finally founded in the country, the Hellenic Association of Conference Interpreters, and we have here the president of CTC, obviously, Maria Petrohilou, the vice president, and Marilia Tili as well as a member. Also new for the Greek landscape is the fact that in the last 5 years, there have been some publications about mainly community interpreting, and the first 2 PhDs dealing with conference and court interpreting. Regarding court interpreting, there is not a single educational program specializing in court interpreting, despite the Greek Criminal Code of Procedure and in its Article 233, according to which the judges have to resort to a list of court interpreters in order to appoint an interpreter, and only in exceptional cases, that means in emergencies, if it is not possible to appoint an interpreter directly from the list, is the appointment of someone from outside the list allowed. However, the Greek law does not impose any requirements on qualifications for court interpreters, nor does it provide any mechanism to qualify them. As a result, just anyone can declare themselves an interpreter and ask their name as well as their working languages to be included in the list without needing to provide any proof of their qualifications. This lack of accreditation and certification procedure has often raised quality and human rights issues, such as, for instance, the case of a woman who was appointed as an interpreter by the criminal courts of Thessaloniki in trials involving Albanian witnesses or defendants, despite her not knowing the Albanian language at all, and although she was included in the court's list for Bulgarian, Serbian, and back then Yugoslavian. It's a well-known case. And you all remember that the court actually declared her innocent of the charges because they concluded that because she knows English and she knows Serbian, she can interpret into Albanian. Greek court decision. According to a survey which was done in 2015 among judges of the Court of First Instance in Thessaloniki, though a comparatively little sample, they had only 18 replies from 60 questionnaires that were distributed, which is only indicative of a tendency. Only 22% of them use the official list as a practice, that means always. 62% acknowledge to appointing sometimes a person who is not officially included in the list, but happens to be in the courtroom at the time needed. We all know about the court interpreter's remuneration being extremely low, around 11.74 euros for each interrogation procedure and 17 euros something for each court case. And even if the case has to be extended over several court sessions, they are obligated to attend the courtroom at 9 a.m. without knowing when and where their services would be enlisted. And should the trial be postponed, they receive no remuneration at all, although they were there at court and they were ready to deliver their services on the spot. There is no provision in the law regarding additional charges for overtime work, while in many cases significant delays in excess of 12 months in the payment of these remunerations seem to be the rule rather than the exception. Now, court interpreting cannot be seen as part of community interpreting. Although in some countries there is a tendency to do this, as it requires highly specific expertise, but if this is the situation regarding court interpreting, which is a human right and foreseen in the Greek law, and with a background in the field of interpretation in general, we can only imagine how the Greek state never properly reacts to the interpretation needs of refugees. Up to now, there is a total absence of certified programs in higher education and in private education as well. Usually, whenever a new humanitarian program starts to be implemented, focusing, for example, either on child protection or the protection of victims of torture, interpreters as member of an interdisciplinary team are being introduced to a code of conduct with which they have to comply. Furthermore, they are trained on the way they have to cooperate with other colleagues. These trainings usually last just a few hours and offer simply a superficial approach as to the terminology that will eventually be used and the procedures that will be applied. A large number of interpreters working now, they have been trained by the Greek NGO Metadersi, as we heard early this morning. This NGO was founded in 2010 and offers 2-week seminars for participants who are willing to work as interpreters in asylum procedures. In their webpage, they state that they focus on services not covered by the public authorities or other NGOs in Greece, and that they offer specially trained interpreters in 43 languages and dialects to provide vital communication with refugees, legal support, and certification of victims of torture. Now, until the end of April 2018, 808 people have obtained their certificate of proficiency in 43 dialects and languages. Those who pass the exams can be registered at the organization's register for interpreters, an internal pool for community interpreters who are obliged, contractually I may add, to work only for Metadersi. The adequacy of the interpreter lasts for a year. This means that they have to renew their accreditation every year, and then a new assessment is required. Metadersi acts as a subcontractor. Meanwhile, we know that Metadersi provides with community interpreters and cultural mediators the majority of the national and international NGOs, as well as the UNHCR. The interesting thing here is the term cultural mediator, or we use the term intercultural mediator as well. This is a term frequently used in many countries for interpreting services for immigrants or refugees alike. Community interpreters are called in to provide cultural mediation services and vice versa. Both terms were rather unknown until recently in the Greek society, and there is no clear distinction between the two professions. In fact, in Greece, the definition and practice of intercultural mediator is closer to what is described as community interpreting, meaning the interpreting offered in the public services environment in order to ensure that immigrants are able to enjoy the right to have access to health and legal services of the host country. This means in hospitals, in the police department, in public office, public services, training, education, etc. The consequences, because of the confusion between those two terms, can be seen at both the educational as well as the professional level. Because if there is no clear distinction between the two concepts, it is not possible to train them adequately, and neither is it possible for them to properly fulfill their professions and even claim appropriate working conditions. The concept of mediating at an intercultural level is implied in the tasks of any interpreter or translator. They have to bridge both the linguistic and cultural gap through interpreting and then transfer cultural information in order to establish communication. But this does not mean that they can undertake an autonomous action like having separate discussions with one side or informing the participants about procedures, possibilities, or their rights, or even encourage them to express their concerns, as is done regularly in crisis settings. The criteria set by the job offers in any NGO are simply the knowledge of the source language, the good command of Greek or English, and some relevant experience in the field, if any at all. Community interpreters are basically native speakers that speak fluently the source languages, and at the same time they may master certain dialects of their home country. A representative example is that of Iraqi citizens that, apart from Arabic, they also command Kurdish dialects, such as Kurmanji, Sorani, and Palevani, etc. Nevertheless, there are major challenges even in the use of the mother tongue, especially when it comes to languages such as Arabic, since, for example, a Lebanese interpreter cannot easily communicate with an Algerian beneficiary, and the other way around. The Arabic, as we know, of course, the Arabic language has many variations within the Arabic-speaking countries. Furthermore, during certain procedures before the asylum service, at the court or in sessions with the physicians, things are more complicated since most of the interpreters are not familiar with the legal or medical terminology, mainly due to the fact that they lack relevant education or experience, or both. It goes without saying that interpreters currently working within that framework have a competitive advantage that consists in the deep knowledge of the cultural background. This is a specific feature that is of paramount importance, since they can provide useful input either to a lawyer or to a psychologist as to the traditions, beliefs, history, etc. of the specific ethnic group, a minority, or a political group of a country. Nonetheless, in some occasions, that knowledge might not be used in a proper way, since an interpreter might be prejudiced towards a beneficiary because of their origins. As far as the education level of the interpreters is concerned, there are many variations. Since a university degree is not a prerequisite, an interpreter might have just finished high school in his or her home country, or have started studies at the university that were actually abruptly interrupted by the war, and only few of them have graduated from faculties of literature. Others have just been a long time in Greece working in various jobs, or they are asylum applicants themselves having a good command of English, without nevertheless having relevant professional experience. The lack of previous experience renders the provision of interpreting services more complicated, given that interpreting is by default a multitasking condition that requires special skills and competencies. In addition to that, a community interpreter has to be equipped with additional skills such as flexibility and resilience. In practice, a community interpreter has to work from 9 to 5 at a refugee camp, exposed to harsh weather conditions at a hospital for an urgent medical incident, or even during a fight between members of certain ethnicities. According to the research report on intercultural mediation for immigrants in Greece, which was implemented by the Hellenic Open University in 2015 and co-funded by the European Commission, this is called the TRAMIG Project, a registry of trained intercultural mediators was created. The registry offers all institutions in need of interpreters or mediators services the opportunity to search for a trained mediator for the language and the area in question and to contact them directly. Agreements on the terms of cooperation are made by the parties involved. No data is available on the extent of the registry use, and the website has not been updated since 2016, 3 years. Of the 586 interpreters or mediators that have been trained in Greece until 2013, according to that report, only very few reported that they were actually working regularly for NGOs involved in migrant issues. Some of them reported that they were offering mediation services through migrant organizations and through direct contact with local authorities. Others reported that they would occasionally offer their services voluntarily. Of the 417 mediators that could be contacted, 36 of them, that is 8.6%, declared that they are not interested anymore in working as intercultural mediators, despite the positive attitude of the majority towards the creation of a mediator registry. Only 139 mediators registered of the total contacted. That means only 33.3% responded. The problematic situation is not a Greek privilege. Andres, sorry for my German, professor of translation studies said, sorry for my German, Germensheim, University of Mainz, Germany, describes the situation which exists also in the German market as follows. The lack of language skills, but also expertise, the failure to understand processes and strategies, the misunderstanding of situation-specific features, and insecurity in the role function. In other words, lack of training and lack of legal provisions, which in the interpretation situation lead to complications and to an ethically and morally questionable handling of power by the interpreter. Now, a proper educational program has to set the boundaries and frame the services provided by the interpreters, and in my opinion, this should be conducted by trainers of conference interpreters who are conference interpreters themselves. In addition to the ability to mediate between two cultures and languages and the consecutive and simultaneous interpreting techniques, there are other factors of importance, such as the management not only of the interpreter's stress, but of the interpreter's trauma, the understanding of processes and strategies, and the consciousness of the interpreting ethics. I completely understand that the associations of professional interpreters are very skeptical towards non-professional interpreters, but as Silvia Kalina states, at a time when migrants and refugees in large numbers have a need of communication that they cannot meet without linguistic assistance, it is the order of the day. This means that we have to find ways for vocational trainings that are offered by the state and are conducted by professional interpreters / trainers. The Aristotle University of Thessaloniki, as the only one in Greece offering since 2003 a master's in conference interpreting, with co-funding from the DG Interpretation of the European Commission, and according to the EMCI standards, has a unique expertise in this educational field. Since January 2019, we participate at a new EU-funded program called TRAMIG, Training New Arrived Migrants for Community Interpreting and Intercultural Mediation, which is being implemented for 2 years, that means 2019 and 2020, by 4 universities. That's the University of Ljubljana in Slovenia, the Aristotle University in Thessaloniki, the University of Trieste in Italy, and the Oslo Metropolitan University in Norway, plus 2 medical centers, the local health authority of Reggio Emilia and the National Institute for Public Health in Slovenia. The TRAMIG project aims to contribute to defining the practice, status, and role of intercultural mediators and interpreters working particularly in healthcare. It is worth mentioning that in healthcare, previous studies indicate that high-quality language and cultural support shortens a hospital stay, reduces readmission rates, and thus considerably lowers healthcare costs. Furthermore, it aims in creating a proposal for the occupational standards and vocational qualification of these 2 professions, creating teacher training modules, drawing on best practices of the consortium partners, training migrants for collaborative teaching in healthcare community interpreter and intercultural mediator training programs. 4 workshops will take place in the countries involved, 3 at the universities and 1 in the Health Center of Italy, where a methodology of learning and teaching community interpreting will be developed, with special emphasis on teaching in pairs and role plays. In project-based learning through simulation and through immersion, in continuous assessment, group assessment, diary, collective reports, etc. It's a list of tools that the project aims to use and produce. So there was an open call. Each institution selected 2 or 6 candidates, mainly newly arrived migrants who already work as community interpreters or intercultural mediators. They have been selected to take part at the workshops. And I think currently this is work in progress. I don't want to go through a very long description here, since we are still at the beginning of this program. Let me see, and I'm going to close now, like you. How do I go back? Sorry, thank you. The foreseeable impact of the project is to open up employment possibilities for the newly arrived migrants with corresponding competencies to find employment as trainers in community interpreting and intercultural mediation programs, enter the labor market of the host country, and thus make an important step towards the economic and social inclusion into the host country. The project also will result in long-term changes and improvements for the benefit of the disadvantaged target groups. These newly trained trainers will enhance possibility of other newly arrived migrants to be trained and to find employment as community interpreters and intercultural mediators in the host country. Secondly, the results of the project will have a positive impact on the European higher education area, since it will provide material and guidelines how to train future trainers for community interpreting and intercultural mediation programs, and how to respond to the quickly changing language needs of the market. And I'm going to end here the presentation. Thank you very much for your patience.